A single leaf of goatskin parchment sits in a locked wooden chest inside the Church of Our Lady, Mary of Zion, in Axum, Ethiopia. It has not left that compound in living memory. Guards stand at the gate. Tourists are turned away at the wall. On that leaf, in an alphabet almost no one alive can read, is a list. Not a prayer, not a hymn. A list of names. And beside each name, a skill that name taught to human beings. Church leaders voted the Book of Enoch out of Scripture at the Council of Laodicea in 363 CE. They banned it, buried it, called it dangerous. For 17 centuries in the West, it stayed that way. Then, in 1947, in the caves at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls surfaced, and among them were 11 separate copies of Enoch, written in Aramaic, older than any surviving copy of most books that stayed in the Bible. Not a fringe text, one of the most copied documents the community owned. And when scholars translated the oldest fragments, they found what the list actually says. The Book of Enoch claims civilization did not evolve. It was handed over. Metalworking, weapons, chemistry, cosmetics, astronomy, the reading of the sky, all of it delivered in a single generation by beings the text says were not human. Not a myth, not a metaphor. Enoch names the beings. He names what each one taught, and he records the exact moment the ancient world changed because of it. In the next several minutes, you will see what the text says, what the archaeological record shows about when these technologies actually appear, and why access to the oldest manuscripts has been restricted since 1974. If forbidden history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from the record. But here's what makes this stranger. This is not a vague claim buried in one obscure line. It is an itemized ledger, and it sits in chapters 6 through 8 of the Book of the Watchers, the oldest layer of the entire text. Fragment 4Q 201, held in the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem, preserves this exact section in Aramaic, carbon dated to older than any New Testament writing. The complete version survives only in the Ethiopic Ge'ez manuscript tradition at Axum. R.H. Charles produced the standard English translation in 1912. Michael Nibb's 1978 Oxford edition worked directly from the Ethiopic. And every one of them agrees on the structure of Chapter 8. It is not a story. It is a curriculum. The level of detail is wrong for ancient literature. Apocalyptic writing deals in symbols, in beasts, and trumpets, and numbers that stand for something else. This passage does the opposite. It names 200 specific beings. It gives their leaders individual names. It assigns each one a discipline, the way a syllabus assigns instructors to subjects. Chapter 6 even records that they descended in the days of Jared and landed on the summit of Mount Hermon, a real mountain at a real elevation on the modern border between Lebanon and Syria. First person, past tense, place names, named individuals, specific transferred skills. This reads like a personnel record, and this is where it gets disturbing. What we're looking at breaks into 3 parts: metal, sky, and body. The text walks each one in order, and the first is the one that changed everything. The text begins with the leader. Chapter 8, verse 1 says that Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates. Read it flat, and it sounds like a footnote. Read it as what it is, and it is the birth of organized warfare. Swords are not tools. A knife has 100 uses. A sword has 1. It is engineered for a single purpose, ending a human life efficiently. The text does not say humans slowly figured out metallurgy over centuries of trial and error. It says a being named Azazel handed them finished weapons and the knowledge to make more. The GE's verb here is not showed. It is closer to delivered, the transfer of a completed thing. He delivered the sword. But the text doesn't stop there. The same verse continues. Azazel made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. This is the load-bearing line. Not just weapons, but the underlying process. ore extraction, smelting, the reduction of rock into refined metal. Consider what that actually requires. You have to know which stones hold metal, though they look like ordinary rock. You have to build a furnace that reaches over 1,000 degrees. You have to control airflow, fuel, and temperature at once. No animal does this. No natural process suggests it. Every step is counterintuitive, and the text says a non-human being taught the whole chain in one act. He had no way to teach humans that by accident. This is not fire discovered in a lightning strike. This is a syllabus. And then comes the part that shouldn't be possible. Verse 1 keeps going into territory that has nothing to do with survival. Azazel taught the use of antimony, the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. Antimony, a specific chemical element, a metalloid, ground into a black powder and used as eye cosmetic across the ancient world, the substance we now call coal. Set aside the eyeliner for a second and notice what the text just did. It named a specific element by function. Antimony is not something you stumble into. It has to be identified, extracted, and processed. The text lists it in the same breath as metallurgy and weapons, as one more item on the same delivered curriculum. The GEA's word for these coloring agents, sebhat, carries a double sense. On the surface, it means adornment. Underneath, it means transformation, the altering of a natural surface into something it was not. The text is not describing vanity. It is describing chemistry. Here's what the translators left out. Most English readers meet verse 1 as a list of vices, luxury, and war, and paint the corruption of a simple world. That framing softens it into a morality tale. But the older reading of the surrounding verses is not moral at all. It is procedural. Chapter 8 does not stop at Azazel. It becomes an index. Verse 3 assigns the other instructors by name and by subject, and the pattern is unmistakable. Simjaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots, which is to say pharmacology, the extraction of compounds from plants. Barakijal taught astrology. Kokabel taught the constellations, the mapping of fixed stars. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds, weather reading. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth, and Sariel taught the course of the moon, lunar cycles, the foundation of every ancient calendar. Read the list plainly, and it is not a catalog of sins. It is a founding faculty. Astronomy, chemistry, botany, meteorology, metallurgy, calendar science, each assigned to a named being, each delivered to a species that the text says had none of it before. The standard editions frame this as the spread of wickedness. The structure underneath frames it as a technology transfer. The text moves on, but the implication sits there. What modern readers don't realize is how closely this matches the actual archaeological record of when these technologies appear. Look at metallurgy, the centerpiece of the whole passage. For most of human existence, there was none. Stone tools stretch back over 2 million years, an almost unimaginably flat line of no change. Then, in a geological blink, it all arrives. Copper smelting appears around 5000 BCE. Bronze, a deliberate alloy that requires combining two separate metals in precise ratio, around 3300 BCE. And iron, the hardest to work, the one that demands the highest temperatures, shows up as worked meteoric metal in Egypt as early as 3200 BCE. With smelted iron fragments recovered from Proto-Hittite layers at Kaman Kalahuyuk in Anatolia, dated to roughly 2200 to 2000 BCE. Archaeologists themselves describe the transition not as a gradual climb, but as a cluster, a sudden appearance of interlocking technologies in the same window. The text describes technology arriving in a single generation by transfer. The record shows technology arriving in a compressed burst after 2 million years of nothing. The parallel is not metaphorical. It is structural, and it is not only the metal, antimony, The exact substance named in Chapter 8 turns up as processed eye cosmetic in Egypt and Mesopotamia, in the same early window, a refined metalloid appearing in a world that supposedly had no chemistry. Astronomy, assigned in the text to Kokabel and Barakijal, appears fully formed in the earliest Mesopotamian records, with star catalogs and predictive tables that imply generations of prior observation. The archaeological record does not show accumulating. The disciplines, the text names as delivered, are precisely the disciplines that appear in the human record, without a clear runway behind them. Isolated, sudden, assembled. There is a second confirmation, and it comes from the text itself. The Book of Enoch does not stand alone on this. The canonical Book of Genesis, chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, records the same event in compressed form, the sons of God taking human wives, and the Nephilim, the giants, appearing on the earth as a result. Genesis states the event and moves on in 4 verses. Enoch is the long version. The field report Genesis summarizes that 2 separate traditions, one kept in every Bible and one banned from most, describe the same descent of non-human beings and the same corruption of the human line, is itself a kind of cross-reference. Enoch names what Genesis only gestures at, and the Aramaic Book of Giants, recovered in 9 separate copies from the same Qumran cave as the Enoch fragments, extends the record further, naming the offspring and describing what they did with the knowledge their fathers delivered. 3 traditions, 1 event, the same beings, and the text is careful about consequence. Chapter 8 does not present the transfer as a gift. Verse 2 records that as a direct result, godlessness increased and humanity was led astray and corrupted in all its ways. The knowledge came first. The collapse followed. The text is drawing a line of cause and effect. Technology delivered. Then a civilization destabilized by what it could suddenly do. Weapons that had not existed now existed. Chemistry that had not existed now existed. And the world, in the text's own accounting, could not hold the weight of it. He wrote it down, not as celebration, but as warning. The same matter-of-fact tone you would use filing an incident report. This is what was delivered. This is what it cost. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. Church leaders removed Enoch from the canon and, according to later tradition, called its contents dangerous. The specific problem was never only theological. A story about symbolic sin is harmless. A detailed claim that named non-human beings delivered real, identifiable technologies to humanity is a testable claim, and testable claims are the dangerous kind. Jerome, compiling the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, dismissed Enoch as apocryphal and unworthy of the canon. Augustine, writing in the City of God around 410 CE, acknowledged the book existed and had circulated widely, but argued it could not be trusted precisely because it claimed too much specific knowledge. Neither man explained the list. Neither addressed why a text from before the Roman Empire itemized the arrival of metallurgy by name. The Ethiopian Church, operating independently of Rome, kept Enoch in its Bible, which is why the complete text survives at all. When the Scottish explorer James Bruce carried 3 GEA's manuscripts out of Ethiopia to Europe in 1773, European scholars finally had the full chapter 8 in front of them, and the reception was hostile. The idea that civilization was handed over rather than earned sat badly against every assumption of the age. R.H. Charles, producing the translation most people still quote, treated the teaching list as garbled folklore, a primitive people's confused memory of learning to work metal. He had no explanation for the specificity. He offered dismissal instead. Now, here's where it gets active. Access to the Axum manuscripts was restricted after 1974, when the Ethiopian Revolution brought a new government that classified church holdings as protected national property. Since then, Direct examination of the oldest complete GES witnesses has been effectively closed to outside scholars. Requests to photograph and collate the Axum tradition against the Qumran Aramaic have gone unanswered for decades. The result is a strange gap. We have the fragments in Jerusalem. We have the later copies in Western libraries. But the oldest continuous line, the one the Ethiopian church guarded for over 1,000 years, sits behind a wall. And the collation that would settle exactly what chapter 8 originally said in its fullest form has not been permitted in 50 years. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying a being named Azazel physically descended onto a mountain and handed out swords and eyeliner. The Book of Enoch is not an engineering manual, and ancient people were capable of genius on their own. But what the text describes, when you read it carefully, matches the shape of the record more than it should. It names metallurgy, and metallurgy appears in a sudden cluster after 2 million years of stone. It names antimony, a specific processed element, and antimony appears as refined cosmetic in the same early window. It names astronomy and calendar science, and both appear fully formed with no visible runway. It lists these as delivered together by named agents. He had no periodic table, no archaeological record, no way to know which technologies would turn out to cluster. And yet, the list sits there, in GEs and Aramaic, in fragments pulled from a cave at Qumran, saying what it has said for over 2,000 years. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If human technology sat flat for 2 million years and then arrived in a compressed burst, if that burst included metallurgy, chemistry, and astronomy, the exact disciplines the text names, if a document older than the Roman Empire lists those disciplines by name and assigns each to a specific agent, then the passage is not a morality tale about wickedness. It is a record of an event. Enoch, or whoever wrote under that name, did not preach. He inventoried. He wrote it down the way a clerk logs a shipment. One named supplier and one delivered good per line. The list he left is either a symbol we have misread for 2 millennia, or it is exactly what it appears to be, a receipt. The manuscripts remain in Axum, behind stone and government restriction, uncollated for 50 years. Fragment 4Q201 sits under glass in Jerusalem, the Aramaic teaching list intact. The archaeological layers at Kaman Kalahayuk hold their early iron in a museum in Turkey. And in a text the church removed from the record 17 centuries ago, a list of names still stands beside a list of skills, recording the moment the ancient world stopped being ancient. The names are still there, the list is still intact, and the technologies it says were delivered are still in our hands, still doing exactly what the text said they would do. Every investigation we run starts the same way, with a document someone tried to bury. There's another one on your screen right now.